Hi, and welcome to Magic Numbers. This is episode number 72, and today we're going to be talking about Lords in Limited. Not Lords of Limited, which is a great podcast, I have to admit, but Lords in Limited, so creatures that pump other creatures of their tribe or other creatures in general. And apart from that, we're also going to talk a bit about how to navigate the data of a weak color without falling into some traps. And also, we're going to be talking about the early look at the March of the Machine and what are my initial thoughts about the format from what WotC has shown us. Thank you. Cat is contributing to the podcast by trying to beg for some food. No, not the time. There we go. Oh my God, Scorcha. That doesn't make my work easy having multiple animals next to me. Please go there. Thank you. But before we move on to this, if the cat will allow me to do that, I would like to thank my sponsor, mtgazone.com. This week, hopefully, if I finish it tomorrow, I'm going to have a April Fool's episode, and I think it's fun. And if you don't agree, then I don't care. So check it out. Possibly on Saturday, it will be published. And I'm very interested in your feedback about it. It's not about limited per se. It's more weird, let's call it. But yeah, probably it will be worth at least giving it a look. But of course, that's not the only sponsor I have. I have a good sponsorship from my patrons because I do have a Patreon. And this week, actually, there are two new patrons joining. Zach Kagan, the famous Zach Kagan, has sponsored me now, and Dane. These are my two new patrons. But the spaces are not limited, so if you want to join, please do. All right, so let's move to the first stage of the podcast, and this is the preamble that I have every time. And this week's preamble is finding general trends is much harder than analyzing current format. This is something that I can maybe play my little violin, but generally, I do like analyzing the current set, and it's always interesting. But my main interest in terms of looking at data and magic is looking across multiple formats and trying to find those trends that are universal for them. And the problem with that is that it's very hard to find a good question. It's very hard to filter the data from different formats because they all have their specificities. And sometimes, well, it's not very easy to do that. For example, today's topic will be Lords Unlimited. Some formats have 5 Lords, some formats have 1, some formats have 0. It's very hard to find the trends. Some of the archetypes with lords in them were a bit of a miss, and therefore the card was not good. But can you blame the lord itself for the support not being there? And in some formats, the lord is absolutely essential for the functioning of the archetype, and in some formats, the support cards are so good that the lord is nice to have but not necessary. So yeah. And the same goes for things like mana usage, card draw, being on the play. All those things will be so set specific that it's really hard to find those general trends in a meaningful way. And this is one of the things that I think is stopping the development of limited and is making the utility of the data slightly less. Because not many people are trying to look at the general trends for those reasons that I mentioned. I mean, it's just generally hard, and uh, the rewards are pretty small when you do that, and even if you manage, because obviously people are interested in the current format. And my God, what is going on with my cat? He got completely mental. Is he locked out? Oh. So today's podcast is also brought to you by my pets, who are currently having an argument between each other. I will have to pause because I have to let that bloody cat out, because otherwise he will never let me. Okay, sorry for that, but there was no way other than letting the cat out because he was struggling with the cat flap. Now I also have a dog that is stuck with his head through the cat flap because he doesn't fit through it, but he wants to see through what's outside. Okay, back to things. So yeah, general trends. This is the thing that this is the way that we should approach data in the next couple of years, because the amount of data is there to start looking at them properly. And I think that we as a community should spend a bit more time asking ourselves questions and finding good questions that can be answered. And I know that not everyone can analyze the data, or not anyone is feeling comfortable enough to do so, but it's sometimes enough to tag some of the data people in a Twitter post if you think a good question that can be answered by looking at multiple sets. And who knows, if your idea is good, I might be actually willing to spend some time and try to answer it. So if you have any of those questions, definitely tag me, and I might do at some stage the AMA episode where I will be exploring data like that. Okay, that goes with the preamble. But that's not all, because obviously, as I have Patreon right now, one of the perks of the Patreon is being allowed to ask question of the week. Since only one person qualifies for that Patreon level, it's again Mercurio Blues question. And this week it is how to evaluate commons in weaker colors. This is a sort of an issue, because when you look at the data, very often those weak colors will have a lot of poor decks, because being a weak color does not necessarily mean that the color is absolutely unplayable, but it means that the builds are not intuitive. And if the builds are not intuitive, a lot of data will also be quite rubbish. And there are several strategies how you can look at the data from those weaker colors, and how you can get better idea. And not only data, but there are also other tools within 17 Lens universe that you can utilize apart, that are sort of data independent, that might give you some good ideas of what needs to be done for a color to be playable. So this graph shows you the win rate of a color by looking at the color per archetypes win rates, and then way average all of them from these first 3 days of the second week of Shadows over Innistrad remastered. As you can see, white is by far the best color. So in this iteration, it has white decks in general have around 56% win rate. Then we have red at 54.5. Then we have green at 53.8. And then we have black and blue at around 53% win rate. And this means that all the white decks, when you add up how many games they played, the white, blue, white, red, white, green, and white, black, I have the 55% win rate. And all the blue decks, including blue, white, and all the other combinations of the color, have around 53% win rate. This means that it looks little, but actually this is quite a big difference. The 2.5 percentage points difference between black and white is actually quite large, because they also share an archetype, and because of that, and also black shares an archetype with red, which has a relatively high win rate on its own. So because of those sharing with other colors, those differences will never be too big, especially that 17 Lens users tend to overdraft color combinations that are actually stronger. So despite black having quite strong archetypes like black-red, and despite blue having quite strong archetypes like white-blue, they still are quite significantly behind what white does or what red does in this format. So how to approach looking at the data of the weakest colors, and I decided to pick black as the example for this analysis. First of all, let's look at the individual archetypes. I think that's the best place to start. If we look at the black, Rakdos is the best black archetype at 54.7. That's still roughly 2.5 percentage points lower than Boros, which is the highest win rate archetype in the second week so far. Slightly to my surprise, but I think that it gains from a couple of cards being added to the mix, and also it, I think, gains a lot by people trying to do spider spawning quite a lot, and that leaves red and white cards quite open, because spider spawning will be predominantly focused in Selesnya. So you can make those Boros piles that are A, slightly more open, and B, they actually deal quite well with those kind of dirty decks if you have a good start. But yeah, Rakdos is absolutely not bad. So first thing that you might look when you're trying to find something to do with those weaker colors is to look at where they are actually decent. And Rakdos and Orzhov are two archetypes that, they're not tier 1 by any means, but they at 54.7, 53.4% win rate, they are not bad. And Golgari maybe also is there and abouts. Now, Dimir is pretty poor at 48.2. That's for 17 lands. That's a really, really, really bad result. Chronic 33 is asking, isn't spawning Golgari? Spawning itself is, but a lot of support cards are in blue. So you often will have kind of a mix of green, black, and blue. Sometimes you'll have like a blue-green deck, maybe splashing black for the flashback of spider spawning. So these are the colors where the synergies that help spider spawning are going to be focused. So yeah, this initial look tells us that probably we should limit ourselves. If you want to get like the base of how to make black work, probably we should focus on the Rakdos and then see what's going on in there. So these are top commons in black in general. That's also a good place to start your search for what would be useful in this color by looking at the top commons. And we have one card that is head and shoulders above the rest, and that's Kisa's Bidding. The 4-mana sorcery, make two zombies, but it has also a madness cost of 2 and a black. So for 3 mana, you can cast it if you can discard it somehow. And 3 mana instant speed, 2/2 bodies is quite strong card. Therefore, it has the highest win rate. Second place is by quite a large margin, almost 2 percentage points difference, is Olivia's Dragoon. And that's a 2/2, and it has an ability discard a card. It gains flying until end of turn. It's a prime way of enabling madness, and that shows you that. And it's also a vampire, which screams Rakdos, and probably that's why the win rate is high, because it's predominantly played in the best archetype of the color pair. And still, the win rate is not impressive at 54.5. Then we have a third place, Crow of Dark Tidings. And this is probably a card that is a bit underrated in the format. It's a 3 mana 2/1 flyer. When it ETBs or dies, it mills 2. Then we have Deadweight, but that's already like 53.6. That's an enchantment aura that gives target creature -2/-2. Great if you want to enable Delirium, because if it successfully kills something, it puts an enchantment in your graveyard, therefore increasing the types by 1 that is hard to get. But again, that's already 53.6. And then we have a bunch of things at 52, 51%. So looking at this data, I see that black doesn't seem impressive at the common level, and that's probably a big problem of it. It has one card, then maybe 2-3 decent ones, and the rest is very, very replaceable, which is a problem. If the cards lack an individual power, then there is also a potential that they will have synergies. And to look for synergies, you probably should go into a more granular data set, because you won't see synergies if you look across all the 4 archetypes. And luckily, in 17 lands, you can look through the win rate data of each color, each rarity, also through the lens of a particular archetype. And here I looked at the win rate data of the commons in white-black, in Orzhov, because Orzhov is sort of not far behind Rakdos, but it's probably much less understood on how to build it. And because it's less understood, maybe the data can shed the light on what it wants to be doing. And And yeah, the top winning common in white black is Weirded Vampire, but I have to put a big asterisk on that card because it has a very small sample size. So I think that it's played in maybe some of the white black decks that actually have good ways of enabling madness. And it's a very small subset of those decks that is potentially, it won't potentially fit in every deck. So when I look through the data, I don't only look at the win percentage, I look through all the data points that I can to get as much information out of those points as I physically have. And in case of Weirded Vampire, I can see, yes, it's probably very good in these decks that also have multiple Olivia's Dragoons, which are actually not great in this archetype in general. But if you have already a bunch of Gissa's Biddings and Weirded Vampires, you can, and you added supplement those with some good white cards, because white is the best color in the set, then you would probably increase the power of the Weirded Vampire. Second place, quite surprisingly to me, at 56.4, was the Crow of Dark Tidings. And then third place is Certain Death, the 6-mana removal that drains for 1. So these are the top 3 cards, and then Sanitarium Skeleton is in fourth place, but basically ex aequo with Certain Death at 55.9. Sanitarium Skeleton is the skeleton that you can return to your hand from the graveyard. And then I see another couple of cards that get better with graveyard being filled in. Thraben Foulbloods, it's a card that with Delirium becomes a 4/3 menace. Ghoulcaller's Accomplice, it's a card that you can exile from your graveyard to make a zombie. So this, combined with the fact that you do well with the Crow of Dark Tidings, and combined with the fact that I look through the data and I do know that some of the white cards that also can be exiled from the graveyard to make spirit tokens are also quite high in it. This tells me that together with Sanitarium Skeleton, those will maybe make sort of a backbone of a deck that wants to use self-mill for value, generate creatures out of the things that you milled, while enabling Delirium and getting benefits from Delirium. So this is one way of looking through it. Look through the win rates of individual commons of a particular archetype in that color, and then maybe you can get a slightly better view of how the cards look like. But that's not always going to work. I mean, I, for example, looked through the win rate of the commons in blue-black, and I looked and I looked and I saw absolutely nothing in there. It was just very chaotic. And I think that this has a lot to do with the fact that people don't know how to build the blue-black decks, because if they knew, then the win rate of the archetype wouldn't be 48%. But it is. So how can you look through those archetypes that are hard to judge? Well, first of all, we don't know if they can work at all. Maybe they are just too bad to work and you can't find a good version of it. But occasionally people do trophy with blue-black. I'm saying occasionally because it won't happen very often. And we looked at the data of color performance earlier. We looked at the data of card performance. And I think that in case of those archetypes that are hard to grasp, the best way of figuring out what makes them tick, except for doing all the archetypist thing and spending 4 days in getting the data out of that, because nobody has time for that kind of stuff, you can look through the recent trophy decks and 17 lands, and that's a pretty useful feature. What I usually do is I try to look at the recent decks of a color combination that I'm interested in that trophied. And also, if I can afford to do that, I prefer to look at the ones that were in, diamond, platinum, diamond, mythic, so that I can filter through people that know what they're doing, but also more importantly, who had a higher level of potential competition. Because of course, ranking up can be hard, and not everyone will go to diamond. Therefore, if you're in diamond, then at least you did something right. So that's exactly what I did when looking at the blue-black. And for example, I found this build here. It's based on 2 copies of Rise from the Tides, has a bunch of Gissa's biddings, has a bunch of spells, very few creatures actually when you look through that, if any even. There's the Homunculus, there's the Scarecrow, but apart from that, it's all spells, and the plan is to survive in the game long enough to cast Rise from the Tides for 9 or something like that. And when you do that, you can take over the game rather rapidly because you have a lot of interaction, so you can push those zombies through for lethal. And this deck trophy, so important to know that it's possible, but it absolutely doesn't do what the archetype is sort of supposed to do. So it doesn't have any zombie synergies, although it does have a lot of potential of generating zombies. And I saw another deck that was slightly different. I don't think I put a copy of it, but you can go through those trophy lists and try to figure out, okay, what was the person drafting that deck and playing that deck? What was their plan? And how did they make it happen? Right. Hopefully that answers the question of the week. So let's move on to the main topic, which will be sort of main topic minus whatever. And today we're going to be talking about Lords in Limited. Tribal is a common theme in Limited, and I think Tribal is a theme that WotC has done so frequently that it usually hits, which means usually when you have a Tribal deck in a format, it's going to be decent. Ironically, I put Inspiring Veteran here in the Tribal that actually missed in Throne of Little Drain because the Knights were not that strong. But they had their moments. If you got a good Knight deck, it was actually quite strong. But especially when Lords are present, those archetypes are usually quite strong. And in the first week of Ser, we had 4 Lords present in the format at uncommon level, but all the Lords are gone from the Shadows of the Past slot this week. So this is a perfect moment to try to evaluate what is the impact of the Lords on the format in general. So I collected a bunch of Lords from the previous sets, and I looked at some of the data related to them. And here we have the color per win rate of the colors that the Lord was in. And I picked several Lords. There is Maya, Bretagard Protector, that was the 5 mana 2/2 that gives all your other creatures +1/+1, and also when you play a land, you get a 1/1 soldier token. And that card was basically in very strong archetypes, because this number shows you, right, not the win rate of the card, but the win rate of the color pair that the card was in the whole format. And you can see that generally Lords were in archetypes that have high win rate. Now, question obviously is this win rate high because the Lords are in the archetype, or is the archetype strong because tribal synergies are generally strong and Lord helps or not, but it doesn't necessarily have an impact on the win rate. But you can see we have the Silver Fur Master, that's the ninja and rogue lord from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, 58.6% the win rate of the archetype. When you go back to the win rates in Shadows of Innistrad, the best archetype, Boros, right now has 57.2. The second best, Selesnya, has 56.1. So 58% win rate is unreachable by any of the archetypes. In fact, the archetypes where top 5 of the Lords on my list were played are actually stronger than the top archetype in this current format so far. So we have Maya 58.7, Silver Fur Master 58.6, Blade Stitched Scab from Midnight Hunt, the 2/3 zombie lord that gave them +1/+0, is 58.2. Yoshan Tactician, the Soldier Lord from Bro, the 3/4 that gave soldiers +1/+1, 58%. Darling of the Masses, the green-white card from Streets of New Capenna that gave citizens +1/+0, 57.4. And even if you go a bit lower, Droxcall Captain 57, Kargan War Leader, the warrior tribal lords from Zendikar Rising, 57 as well. And then we have like Stromkirk Captain from Ser from the first week, 56.7. And then we have slightly lower like Slaughter Singer from 1, Immerwolf from Ser, and Soaring Thought Thief 55.1. These are more or less like tier 2 or 3 of the lords. And then dead last by quite a number is the Diregraph Captain, Zombie Lord from Ser. Blue Black had 47% win rate in that first week when the Lord was present in the format. So clearly, in this one particular case, tribal synergies were just not good, and it might be, if I were a design team, I would spend quite a lot of time looking at the Blue Black zombie theme in Shadows over Innistrad and try to figure out why that one didn't work. If we have such an amazing record of getting the tribal synergies together. And I'm sure that they do that also. So, it's not that I tell them, oh, guys, I'm sure that you don't do it. I'm sure that they do it. It's just that this is the data point that clearly can show that how can you make tribal synergy not work. Okay, so let's look at the impact of the Lord on the deck. And here I looked at the win rate of the games of the decks that had the Lord. And as you can see, it's a mixed bag, actually. Maya, for example, that was in the strongest deck on its own. Maya actually had a 2.7 percentage points lower win rate in the decks that Maya was present than in the general decks, which means that the decks with Maya were significantly weaker than the decks without. And I think that has something to do that the best decks in white-green were super ultra aggressive with a bunch of 1-drops, and the 5-mana Maya was not always on the plan. There were possibly some decks where Maya was absolutely amazing, but these were more like towards mid-range, because one problem that Maya had was that it costs 5 mana to cast, and that's way more than most of the lords in this classification. But for example, like Silver Fur Master, Blade Stitch Scab, Ocean Tactician, all those cards had an almost zero impact on the deck. It means that the win rate of the decks with or without them in those color pairs was roughly identical. Darling of the Masses, also 4 mana card, important to know. This one is weaker by 0.7 percentage points, which is, maybe relevant, maybe not relevant. It's definitely showing that it did not have like a massive improvement effect on the archetype. But then we go to cards like to colors like blue white in Shadows over Innistrad, where having Droxcall Captain in that deck was increasing your win rate by 1.4 percentage points, which is, I would say, substantial, because you have to think, if you're playing blue-white, very often Droxcall Captain is the card that draws you towards playing it. And since this is the card that draws you into playing it, quite a large fraction of the decks in that archetype will have Droxcall Captain. And it shows you that means that the ones that don't have it, and I fortunately don't have that data to analyze more stringently, but those decks that don't have it, I'm pretty sure have a much, much lower win rate than the average, because they are probably a minority of the decks that don't have Droxcall Captain rather than majority. And we see the similar things with Kargan War Leader. That's 0.8 percentage points higher win rate when you have it in the deck than if you don't have it in the red-white in Zendikar Rising. And Stromkirk Captain, this one 1.7 percentage points higher win rate if you had it than if you didn't have. Which again, to me, shows that vampire decks might be in deep trouble in week 2, and it's going to be interesting to see after everything finished, and maybe get a sample size out of that and see what happened. Then we have Slaughter Singer. That one had an 0.7 percentage point uh, lowering effect. Slaughter Singer is a bit of a strange lord because it doesn't give like a permanent effect. It only gives +1/+1 to the attacking toxic creatures rather than to doing it all the time. And two other ones, Immerwolf and Soaring Thought Thief, 0.9 and 1.2 percentage points increase overall. So in general, we left out the Diregraph Captain. The win rate was already poor, and Diregraph Captain inclusion to the deck did not change it by much. Those decks were still winning the same 48% of the games. So barely any difference by having Diregraph Captain or not, which just shows you that not only the deck was not synergistic and not strong, but also the Lord was not strong enough, to put it bluntly. And I don't know, maybe it is something to do that blue black in Shadows over Innistrad, because you have to keep in mind that Diregraph Captain is not a card from Shadows over Innistrad, but Diregraph Captain in Shadows over Innistrad was just not good enough card to play with the synergies of the format, because the format was not about being aggro zombies. The format was a bit maybe kind of attrition-y, play around zombies, and because of that, Diregraph Captain was a miss. But generally, you see that the stronger the archetype is on its own, the slightly lower the impact Lord has, because if the cards are strong already, then Lord is an overkill, and maybe you want to invest in some other cards, so you don't have to go out of the way to pick those Lord creatures in decks when you know that the archetype is already strong. But if the archetype is sort of mid strength, then going full tribal might be a difference between a decent deck and a great deck. Okay. So another bunch of numbers that I wanted to look is the impact of how many of the tribal cards you have in your deck. And I honestly didn't find it in my heart to analyze every single one of them, especially that I don't have the data from Shadows over Innistrad. So instead of that, I focused on one card, and namely Yoshin Soldier from Brothers War, and basically trying to show you how does the win rate change depending on the number of soldiers in that deck. And that's the number of soldiers minus Yoshin Soldier. I didn't count itself, but I counted other Yoshin Soldiers if there were in the deck. So if you had like 4 or less soldiers apart from your Yoshin Soldier, the win rate was around 52%. And it slowly grows. I mean, at 5 it's weirdly 56, but these numbers are based on small enough sample size that maybe there is variance involved in that. But those win rates slowly climb. 53.8 at 6 soldiers, 55.3 at 8 soldiers, 56.5 at 10 soldiers, and then you cross this magic number of 12, and you get win rates in 60% range. So, Yoshin says, yes, it is Yoshin Tactician. Thank you very much, Mercurio. I'm, of course, mean Yoshin Tactician, very much like I meant in the previous slide, where it did say Yoshin Tactician. I somehow wrote Yoshin Soldier in the slide description. But over 12 soldiers, you reach 61% win rate, and 13, 14, 15 soldiers, it's around the mark of 61, 60% win rates. And that's really good. That means that the decks are very strong. So you have to keep in mind that Lords will, and I know it's an intuitive thing, but it's always good to measure those intuitive things, because who knows, maybe they are not as intuitive as we think. But here it's quite clear that increasing the number of soldiers is going to improve your chances of winning. And it will be interesting to get a format when you have multiple lords, to try to compare how important they are based on the cost of the lord and other effects that are present. But in general, it looks like having 12 soldiers, or 12 members of the tribe on top of the lord is the sort of important number when there's like this jump shift. And I think that here in this 10 to 13 range, sample sizes were big enough that you can more or less trust those numbers. Okay, so that's the Ocean Soldier. Then I looked a bit at the win rates of tribal decks from Shadows over Innistrad Remastered over the first week and over the second week. And generally, Azorius, Rakdos, and Gruul, three color combinations that were good and had the Lord, they basically lost win rate across the between the first and the second week. So Azorius had 57, now it has 55.9. Rakdos had 56.7, now it's 55.3% win rate. Gruul 55.7 to 54.7, so roughly like one and a bit percentage points drop in the win rate. Dimir weirdly increased the win rate from 4.7 to 40 from 47 to 48.8%, which to me means that not going for those zombie synergies is probably a good idea when you're playing blue-black. And if you saw just a couple of minutes ago, the trophy deck that I showed you didn't have any zombie or zombie synergies except for one card that makes a bunch of zombies and doesn't care about zombie synergy, but cares about spell synergies, and especially spells in the graveyard synergies. So maybe because Lord was taken away, more people are trying to build Dimir as a sort of maybe semi-combo attrition control. And that's why maybe the win rate went slightly up. I mean, it's still bad, don't get me wrong, but it's slightly better in the second week. It's also, we have to keep in mind that we're not only comparing the colors that lost the Lord, but also these colors gained some other cards that maybe partially at least compensate for not having the Lord. Like, for example, in my head at least, the blue-white spirits gained the card that can tap two creatures and has a flashback that also can tap two creatures. I think this card is pretty strong in tempo strategy because it allows you to win the races very much like the Lord did. But the Lord did it by accelerating your clock, while the current card can, I forgot its name, obviously, but it can slow the clock of the opponent down enough so that your clock doesn't need to be faster, it just needs to be there. So there is some kind of a trade-off between what was removed and what was put back. So yeah, these are the lords, and I did not make a slide about it, but I think that a pretty interesting card on that list was the Soaring Thought Thief. Like, first of all, Soaring Thought Thief was in a deck that was actually relatively poor unless you had the Soaring Thought Thief. I think that if you played the blue-black deck and you had a Soaring Thought Thief in your hand, you had something like 14 percentage points higher win rate than if you didn't draw it. So the card was absolutely essential because not only it was the Lord, but it was also a key enabler of the main mechanic of the blue-black decks, which was having opponents having 7 or more cards in their graveyard. So Soaring Thought Thief enabled both those strategies, and because of that, it pumped all your creatures if the conditions were met, and it allowed you to make sure that you will be able to fulfill that condition of 7 cards in the graveyard by helping to mill your opponent. And because of that, the card was so amazing. And even though when you look at the color pen win rate, Soaring Thought Thief is dead last in terms of the color win rate, except for this, blue-black in Ser that I just refuse to treat like a tribal deck because probably shouldn't play it as a tribal. But because of that Soaring Thought Thief, even though the decks with it were not strong, once you drew it, once you maybe had a couple of those, your deck became insanely good all of a sudden, because that's how important this particular Lord was. While the other ones, they do have some effect, and they do improve with the number of creatures in the tribe, as I showed on the example of the Ocean Tactician, but they are not absolutely essential, and very often they will not do much to improve the win rate of your deck. And I think that in any format where tribal is an important synergy part, it's worth looking at those numbers and at those stats. And I already know that in March of the Machine, we are going to have, I don't know if at uncommon, but at least at rare, we're going to have some lords. There is already a spoiler of a Phyrexian lord. So that's going to be interesting how that one works. Obviously, it's a rare, so it's slightly higher power level, but this is a lord that you can recur every turn. Therefore, if you are playing a heavy Phyrexia theme, you might want to do anything in your power to make sure that you get access to that card, either by self-milling yourself or by digging through it or by tutoring for it and stuff like that. So it's going to be interesting to look through that. Okay, and that's basically it in terms of Lords in Limited so far. I will be happy to answer some questions after this seminar if you have any ideas about how to analyze the Lords better. And with that, I will move a bit to the overview of the March of the Machine. And as I mentioned in the beginning of the podcast, try to maybe do some reverse engineering into the heads of Dave Humphreys and co, who were, well, Dave Humphrey was leading leading the design of the set. So we're going to try to figure out what were they thinking and how can we use that to our advantage in the first days. But always keep in mind, we are making these speculations based on reverse engineering of the psychology of the design team and not very much on cards, because we know a bunch of rares and limited limited formats are built on commons, and we don't have access to too many of them. But just by looking at the mechanics and how the set is building up, maybe we can figure out something. And there are, for now, 4 main mechanics: battle, backup, incubate, and convoke. WotC claims that transforming cards is a mechanic. I don't know, sort of, possibly, but there are some transforming cards. So that's technically a mechanism, but I'm just counting it as a kicker. And unless there are cards that are going to be triggered by something transforming, which maybe there are a couple, I don't think that much will be happening. So yeah, battle, I said. And there's already a question in the chat. Is that a new type of card? Yes, it is a new type of card, completely new type of card. So just to explain to you what is happening, we have Invasion of Dominaria. That's a 3-mana spell, 2 and a white. Battle, Siege. And you play it on your turn as a permanent, so it has the sorcery speed kind of casting cost. And as it enters the battlefield, you choose an opponent. So in Limited, it doesn't matter. There is only one to choose from. And that opponent has to protect that card. What does it mean that it protects? It comes in with a number of counters, and they are like Planeswalker counters. So they start at 5, and you basically have to attack those counters or remove them or burn them out. You can do that in many times. And once you get those counters to 0, the card flips and it becomes something else. But first, before that happens, it does always have an ETB effect. So this one has, when Invasion of Dominaria enters the battlefield, you gain 4 life and you draw a card. So basically, you play a 3-mana spell that draws a card and gains you 4 life. And then there's 5 life tokens on it, or whatever you call it. And if you attack it and remove all those counters, Invasion of Dominaria flips, and it becomes Serra, Faithkeeper, and that's a 4/4 flying Vigilance Angel. So how to evaluate those cards is going to be it's going to be pretty tough, because 3 mana for gaining 4 life and drawing a card is not that amazing. I mean, it's something. For 2 mana, it would be great or proper, but for 3 mana, it's maybe a bit overpriced. But you pay this 3 mana not only for the gaining 4 life and drawing a card, but also for a promise of getting that 4/4 flying Vigilance Angel, which is obviously worth like 5 mana or 4 mana if it was a rare. So you get a bargain. If you manage to flip it, you get a bargain. But obviously, to flip it, you also have to deal 5 damage to it. In the simplest scenario, you play it, opponent is tapped out, and you have 5 power on board, and just attack it, and you get the angel. But if that, of course, means that opponent gained 5 life. So possibly you can read this card, 3 mana, draw a card, gain 4 life, and if opponent gains 5 life, you gain 4/4 with Flying Vigilance Angel. I think that it's still a great rate for that kind of effect. It's just, of course, the building of the angel might take some time. But that opens a lot of questions. We're going to talk about it in a second, but that 5 number in here makes me think the design set surely knows that this is a lot. 5. This is like a quarter of your starting life that you need to deal damage to some kind of an artifact just to get that Flying Vigilance Angel. So what is the point? If you can go face to that player and kill them rather than kill the battle. So in my head, the design team is not dumb, and they know that that's the case. Therefore, the format is built in a way that it will be beneficial for you to attack the battle anyway, and not to attack the life. And we're going to talk about it in a second. But let's look at the second mechanic, and that's backup. Backup is it has a number always. So, for example, Boonbringer Valkyrie is a 5 mana Angel Warrior 4/4, 3 at white in casting cost, and has backup 1. And backup 1 means that when this creature enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. If that's another creature, another meaning not the Boonbringer Valkyrie, that another creature gains the following abilities until end of turn. And then there are the abilities of the Boonbringer Valkyrie, which is Flying, First Strike, and Lifelink. So basically 5 mana 4/4 with Flying, First Strike, Lifelink. As it ETBs, you can give Flying, First Strike, and Lifelink to any of your creatures that are on board already, and it also gets a +1/+1 counter. So let's say you have some kind of a 3 mana 3/3 on the board. It's a board stall. You play the Boonbringer Valkyrie, you send the 3/3 into the air. It has Flying, First Strike, and Lifelink, so it attacks. It becomes a 4/4 as well. So you basically deal 4 damage, gain 4 life, and you still have this 4/4 Flying, First Strike, Lifelink Angel on board. And card looks insanely powerful if there's if there's not so much removal. Connor 666111 asks, does it give activated abilities? Yes. So look at the second card. That's Voldaren Thrillseeker. That's a 3 mana Vampire Warrior, a 1/1, and it has backup 2. So when this creature enters the battlefield, put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. If it's another creature, it gains the following ability until end of turn. 1 mana, sacrifice that creature. It deals damage equal to its power to any target. So for example, if you have the Yargle and Multani, which is something like, what is it, 6/7 mana, 18/6, you can play Voldaren Thrillseeker, put 2 +1/+1 counters on Yargle and Multani, and send it for 20 into the face for 1 additional mana. So yeah, you get a potential combo kill in this format like that. But I can imagine other uses of that. For example, you play the Voldaren Thrillseeker, you have a 2/2 on board, and you have a battle that opponent is defending from you that has 4 counters on it. You give the 2 counters on the 2/2, sacrifice it, kill the battle, and you gain the reward of the battle, which is usually a big reward. So maybe it's worth actually to sacrifice that creature, and you're still left with the Voldaren Thrillseeker, which is still a 1/1. Now, importantly, if you don't have another creature, you can always put the backup counters on itself. They won't get the second instance of those abilities. Let's say Boonbringer Valkyrie will not get Flying, First Strike, and Lifelink for the second time, which is not important in case of those abilities, but maybe some other abilities might be relevant. For example, Archpriest of Shadows, the next one, it's a 5 mana 4/4. It has a backup 1, and the abilities it has is Death Touch. And the second ability is whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player or battle, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So, for example, you have a 1/1 flyer somewhere there. you play Archpriest of Shadows, you give the 1/1 flyer +1/+1 counter, and then it attacks, and then it basically reanimates anything from your graveyard whenever it deals damage to the battle or creature. Not Planeswalker, by the way. So yeah, Archpriest of Shadows, if you have the rightly tuned deck, can be also like a house, basically, because 4/4 Death Touch is a good body. It making something evasive bigger and letting you reanimate something is a very big swing of in the game. So probably worth building around that kind of card. And Backup is another scary ability. So already during the battles, I told you, if you play a battle and opponent is tapped out, you can flip the battle quite easily. So which leads me to the idea, because one battle is going to be in every single pack. So there's going to be plenty of battles flying around. This is not going to be a format where you're going to be happy attacking for all unless you kill the opponent. This is the format where you want to leave some defenders back. Because if you don't, you might start the turn in a big advantage and end the turn being way behind. And Backup is similar, because if you tap out and you think that, I'm good. I mean, they have like a 1/1 and I'm just slamming. And all of a sudden they play Archpriest of Shadows, that 1/1 becomes a 2/2 and reanimates something. You will feel quite foolish that you didn't leave something to block. Okay. Why didn't I change the name of the slides? Let's go. There, my famous scrutiny does not apply to making slides, it seems. Okay, let's go back. Incubate is the next mechanic. And Incubate is not as aggressive as the first two, but it's also interesting. So Incubate is an ability whereby you create a token when it enters the battlefield, the card, or when the spell is cast. And that token will get +1/+1 counters, but they're pretty useless because the token is an incubator artifact and it's not a creature. However, you can pay 2 mana and you can flip this incubator token. I don't know how it works. That token has a backside, but okay. They say that it's according to the rules, so I must assume it is. And then, of course, it becomes a 0/0. And because it's 0/0 with +1/+1 counter, it has the same power and toughness as the number of incubate that it was cast for. So, for example, we have a card, Norn's Inquisitor, and that's a 2 mana 1/1. But when it enters the battlefield, incubate 2. So you create this incubator token with 2 +1/+1 counters. And also, when a permanent you control transforms into a Phyrexian, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Which means that if you pay for the incubate token to transform, it transforms into Phyrexian. So let's say you play this on turn 2. It's a 1/1. You make this incubator artifact. Next turn, you pay other 2 mana and you flip the incubator token. And also, Norn's Inquisitor gets +1/+1 counter because it does it every time you transform something into a Phyrexian. So it's like a 2 mana that for another 2 mana becomes 2 bodies that are 2/2s, with Norn's Inquisitor potentially growing further if you have other incubate things. And it's not only on creatures. So the other card is Merciless Repurposing, and that is a 6 mana instant 4 black, and it just says exile target creature, incubate 3. So it kills something, exiles something, and then you get a 3/3 incubator that you can flip into a 3/3 creature for 2 mana later. So for a majestic total of 8 mana split, maybe over 2 turns, possibly, you exile a creature and you get a 3/3, which is expensive, but the 3/3 is nothing. And removal is going to be, I think, important in this format, because There is some pretty busted bombs, it seems to me. Um, Chronic says that Norn makes a 3/3 actually, if still in play. Why a 3/3? Sorry, because I didn't understand. Oh, whenever a permanent you control. Oh yeah, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, yeah. Norn doesn't grow. It's the Phyrexian that grows. Yeah, yeah. So Norn will stay 1/1. It's the incubated Phyrexian that becomes a 3/3. So it's still 4/4 power of sets over two bodies, but differently arranged. Okay. So these are how those incubator token looks like. On one side, you got this incubator, transform this artifact, and on the flip side, you have a 0/0 artifact creature Phyrexian with as many +1/+1 counters as the incubator was when it was cast. Also, yeah, worth noting, these are artifacts, so artifact removal might be actually playable in the set because multiple decks might have those incubator tokens somewhere around, and it will be always nice to nab it if there is a spell that has some other utility. Next ability is Convoke, but this time it's weird because normally we're used to Convoke being in white-green, and this time Convoke is actually in blue-red, which is interesting. So here we have Interdisciplinary Mascot. That's a 6 blue elemental fractal. It's a 5/5 with Ward 3, and it has Convoke. And when it ETBs, you look at the top 4 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So basically, it's a 5/5 Ward 3 with an Impulse. Now, Impulse costs 2 mana normally. So deduct those 2 mana from the cost of it, and it becomes a 6 mana 5/5 ward. So 6 mana 5/5 ward in blue is not terrible, but probably you want to pay 5 for that kind of an effect. So if you can tap one creature, you do pay 5 for that effect. If you tap 2 creatures, you pay 4 for that effect. Now, everything now depends whether you can afford to pay it or not, and that's going to be making or breaking those Convoke spells. I'm pretty sure that you have to be really in front to be able to convoke things that are sorcery speed, like Interdisciplinary Mascot, because tapping 2 creatures means that you're being a bit more open to being slammed. Luckily, the 5/5 Ward 3 might be just enough to prick the opponent. So I think that the size of the Interdisciplinary Mascot is on its is acting in its favor. But still, I mean, this might be a card that you will have to wait for a long time to play, because even if you convoke it with 2 creatures, you still need to pay 6 for it. But Convoke is not only on permanent spells in this format. Here you have Stoke the Flames. That's 2 red for an instant, and it has Convoke, and it says Stoke the Flames deals 4 damage to any target. Now, you can cast it at the end of turn, where tapping your creature does not cost you that much because you won't be needing to block with them anymore, whatever. Which means that quite a lot of the time, Stoke the Flames will be a free spell. And free spell that deals 4 damage to any target is great. And also deals 4 damage to any target means that it can target the battles. And so basically you can just play your creatures, tap out completely, stall the board, opponent doesn't attack, end of turn. You tap 4 of your creatures if you have 2 of them are red, and for 0 mana, you basically kill a battle, transform it, and you get another creature, potentially a really good one. So Stoke the Flames looks absolutely phenomenal to me because Convoke and Instant is a great combination. It basically turns everything that you have into a mana dork, and also they can be a mana dork even with haste. Exactly. You can also block and convoke during the combat when opponent is not expecting something and blow out their combat tricks. I mean, this card just looks so good. It is an uncommon, but I mean, this looks so good. And I think that there are a couple of cards in this format that will help the blue-red Convoke. There are some blue spells that generate some kind of tokens, 1/1s of relevant colors. So maybe you will be able to build a wide enough board to Convoke quite efficiently and get those interdisciplinary mascots for cheapsies. So this is the part that I was already sort of talking about, trying to reverse engineer what is the design team thinking about when they were designing the set. And I'm looking at this card, Invasion of New Pyrexia, for a very specific reason. Not only because it has Teferi that is actually aggressive, which is, seeing this Teferi was one of the better moments in my life, because all those Teferi players that want to play those miserable games without win cons now have to deal with the fact that Teferi is an aggressive planeswalker that pumps creatures and doesn't do anything if you don't have creatures, which is great. But Invasion of New Phyrexia is an X blue-white for a battle. And it has, when Invasion of New Phyrexia enters the battlefield, create X 2/2 white and blue night creature tokens with vigilance. And it has 6 defense, whatever the toughness is called. So if I make like 5 2/2s, I think that, my first instinct would be to go face and just kill the opponent, because that's what multiple 2/2 tokens do best. So clearly the design team doesn't want you to do that, because they would rather make this new mechanic the new type of the card. We don't get new types of cards in Magic every week. We get new cards every week, but not new types of cards. Otherwise, Tarmogoyf would be still good. That means that probably even if you make multiple tokens for the Invasion of New Phyrexia, you still want to attack the Invasion of New Phyrexia to make your tokens better, because you get to flip Teferi, and Teferi is a planeswalker with 4 loyalty that has, you can plus it to draw 2 cards, and then discard 2 cards unless you discard a creature card. Eat this, blue mages. You need to have creatures in your deck to have a net gain of cards from the Teferi. Or you can minus it to get an emblem, -2 it to get an emblem. So if it flips, you can instantly get an emblem, and the emblem says knights you control get +1/+0 and have ward 1. So if you protect the Teferi sufficiently, you can -2 twice, and you get permanent emblems where every knight you control will get +2/+0 and will have ward 1, ward 1. So your New Phyrexia, Invasion of New Phyrexia, white and blue knight creature tokens will be not 2/2s but 4/2s. And then -3, it has tap X creatures you control. Again, it needs creatures. Great. Aggressive Teferi, I love you already. And when you do, shuffle target non-land permanent and opponent controls with mana value X or less into its owner's library. So you can kill something, or at least temporarily incapacitate until they draw it again. But you need to tap creatures to that. I mean, obviously, the positive thing of that is that you can you can obviously do it post attack, because your night tokens have vigilance. But obviously, probably you want to remove it before combat, so you will need to do some actions before you attack, and that will involve tapping creatures. So it's like it's a tricky ability. But I guess if you remove some big threat, it is going to be worth it. But the most important part is that clearly the design team wanted you to attack this battle, which means only one thing in my head, and that is this is going to be a very blocking format. And I already told you, backup is another mechanic that puts me in that kind of line of thinking. And that means we're going to have long games, stally things, big butts matter. Evasion is going to be absolutely clutch, and if you want to do any kind of battle shenanigans, because obviously flyers will be able to go through and kill the battle. There are some spells that can remove counters. There are some spells that deal damage to battles. These are going to be probably a good way of doing it. And coming back to the specific example of the invasion of New Phyrexia, but probably also many others, because the format is slow, even if you accumulate some kind of creature advantage and you start doing attacks trying to trade as many things as possible, it's going to be difficult to deal all 20 damage. So probably the way they try to design it, at least, is going to be, yes, you can try attacking their life total, but you will very often fall short of that. So why not, instead of attacking their life total, do yourself a first small quest? First defeat the battle. If you defeat the battle, you get extra advantage. And that extra advantage will push you through the level that was required to actually start attacking the opponent's life. The more battles you win, the more permanent kind of bonuses you will get. And the more permanent bonus you get, the more advantage you get. And there you can finally start slamming face. Because you're not that worried at that stage because you accrued your value. So I guess that you will have to win some battles to win the war, and at least, I can't tell you that this is how it's that this is how it's going to play out, because we know so few cards that this is sheer speculation. But I am pretty sure that this is what the design team was aiming for, at least, because you don't make a new card type and you don't want to have it sit aimlessly on the battlefield as it is. And yes, I'm sure that this set is going to play very differently for that. But okay. I think that these are all the thoughts that I had on the early spoiler of the March of the Machine. And with that, I would like to thank the 17 Lands team, who's always providing me with the data, the Viral Misnomer, Hululu, Grant Wu, ZTM. Also, big thanks to Fake Jake Brown, who is helping me release this in the podcast form. And while we're at it, Asescu and Mana Junkie, who provide the music for the podcast. Obviously, thanks to all the patrons. I will thank you by putting those slides in my Patreon so you have access to them. You can look through them without listening to my raspy voice. And thanks to MTGA Zone for being the sponsor of this podcast. That's helping greatly my motivation to churn out things. And with that, I'll see you next week.